The sound of a thunderstorm is not just nature in its fury. It often signals that something dark is about to unfold. On August 29, 1955, a violent storm swept over Kraków. It began around 1:20 p.m., and its thunderous roar would soon become the backdrop to one of the most chilling crimes in the city's post-war history. A case little known, yet one that deserves to be told. Dark File. Chilling true stories. From the storm, we shift to a train, because it was aboard this very train that a disturbing discovery set off an investigation that would span more than 2 years. It was August 30th, 1955, a sweltering summer day. A train from Kraków rolled into Gdynia, its final stop. Passengers quietly gathered their belongings and exited the compartments. The train stood still, emptied of travelers, and was soon pushed to a siding. But not all the luggage had been claimed. In one compartment, tucked beneath a seat, a mysterious parcel remained. A cleaner going about her duties noticed the package, an oddly heavy bundle wrapped in parchment and newspaper. With growing unease, she peeled back the layers. What she found beneath the paper would send shockwaves through the railway staff and beyond.
A human leg and a beige stocking. The limb had been severed just above the knee. A Kraków newspaper used to wrap the leg had already dried and clung to the wound like a grim label. The cleaner who discovered the package stumbled backward, frozen in horror. Then, panic. She bolted from the compartment and ran straight to the station manager.
At first, the man didn't take her seriously. He calmly continued eating his breakfast, even cracking a joke at her expense. But her pale face and trembling voice told another story. Something was terribly wrong. He finally stood up and followed her to the train. And there it was. In the middle of the compartment, undeniably, a human leg. Within 20 minutes, an investigation team arrived on the scene. A sweep of the train began, and then another discovery. Under the seat on the opposite side of the same compartment, they found a second leg, this time the right one. Both limbs were transported to the forensic medicine facility in Gdańsk. The experts began working immediately, focused on 3 urgent questions.
What was the approximate age of the victim? When were the legs severed? And what kind of tool was used to commit such a precise, chilling act?
Investigators quickly came to a chilling conclusion. The gruesome package must have been placed on the train at the very beginning of its journey, in Kraków. Why this assumption? Because the train was busy that day. Dozens of people were moving through the carriages. For someone to smuggle a bundle containing human remains onto the train unnoticed, they would have had to act before passengers boarded, before the train even left the station. Trying to place it during the journey would have been far too risky. That led to another grim possibility. The rest of the body was likely still in Kraków. The clue seemed to lie in the wrapping, local newspapers from Kraków used to cover the dismembered legs. And so the militia of the former Kraków province launched a massive search. Their focus, desolate areas, garbage dumps, abandoned lots, any place where the killer could have disposed of the rest of the body. But their most intense efforts centered on one particular region, Podhale. Why? Because one of the legs had been wrapped in a Kraków newspaper that featured a column distributed exclusively in the Podhale region. A local edition, unavailable elsewhere. The assumption seemed logical. Perhaps the killer was from Podhale or had at least passed through. Investigators combed the region, searching every meter of open terrain. Fields, forests, riverbanks, nothing was overlooked. But days of grueling work brought no answers, no body, no clues. Had the killer dumped the remains into water? Buried them deep underground? Or had the entire thing been a calculated diversion? After all, what if wrapping the limbs in that specific newspaper was intentional? An attempt to mislead? A deliberate effort to throw investigators off the scent, to send them hunting in the wrong place while the real trail faded somewhere else entirely? That theory was starting to seem more and more likely.
A few days into the investigation, the forensic department finally had something. It wasn't much, but it was enough to begin narrowing down the search. The victim, they concluded, was a woman, over 30 years old, no taller than 160 centimeters.
Not exactly a breakthrough, but in a case like this, even the smallest detail matters. The militia began cross-referencing these findings with reports of missing women from across the country, those who matched the age, the height, and the general profile. Then, nearly 2 weeks later, came another horrifying discovery. And this time, it wasn't in Podhale. On September 10th in Wrocław, hundreds of kilometers away, police were notified of a gruesome find. A wicker basket left on a train, emitting the unmistakable, sickly stench of a decomposing body. There was no newspaper this time, no carefully wrapped limbs. But there were other clues. Personal items, perhaps. Evidence. And most importantly, the shipment had been sent from Kraków. The date? August 29th. The exact same day the first train left for Gdynia carrying those 2 severed legs. It couldn't be a coincidence. Authorities immediately consulted one of the country's most respected forensic experts, Professor Olbricht. With a new part of the body to examine, he would soon uncover vital new facts.
The body found in Wrocław and the legs from Gdynia belonged to the same woman. The victim had died a violent death, and an expert opinion ruled out natural causes. The dismemberment occurred post-mortem, likely with the intention of concealing and disposing of the corpse to cover up the murder. Although the precise cause of death could not be determined, the most probable hypothesis, according to the professor, was poisoning. Another possibility was blunt force trauma to the head. While the autopsy did not reveal fat embolisms typically associated with such trauma, this theory was not ruled out.
Unfortunately, the protocol describing the items found with the body contained several errors. The name of the officer in charge of the inspection was missing, and although 3 belts were found in the basket, only 2 were documented. This seemingly minor oversight posed a significant problem for the prosecution. The third, unregistered belt, might have belonged to the perpetrator, but since it was not officially recorded in the evidence log, its use in court would be compromised. Even a mediocre defense lawyer could argue to have it excluded, and the court would have no choice but to accept that. What seemed like a few minor clerical errors would, as it turned out, cause serious complications in the investigation. Officers had an extremely difficult case to unravel. Unidentified victim, unidentified perpetrator. The easiest way would be to move forward with the investigation once the woman's identity was established. But how to do that when there was still no head, and reports of recently missing women did not indicate that the body and legs belonged to any of the wanted women? 1955 was too distant a time for genetic testing, but there was another possibility that could have led to an identification. Well, in the 1950s, every Polish citizen was fingerprinted when making an ID card. This procedure was abandoned only a year later, so there was a good chance that the murdered woman was listed in such a database, or rather her fingerprints were listed in it. The severed legs found in Gdynia were preserved in quite good condition. However, the case was much worse for the body. In order to pull the fingerprints from the deceased, it was necessary to inject formalin into the decaying fingertips. Thanks to this procedure, quite clear fingerprints were obtained. They were sent to Warsaw, where attempts were made to match them against existing records. Today, investigators would use AFES, the automated fingerprint identification system, but in the 1950s, everything had to be done manually. Each dactyloscopic trace had to be analyzed and then compared one by one with fingerprints from suspects or missing persons. There's no need to explain how incredibly difficult and time-consuming this process was at the time. And perhaps that's what gives old criminal cases their unique atmosphere. Everything depended on human precision, intuition, and determination. Every detail had to be examined by hand. Every stage of the investigation required more effort, yet many complex cases were still solved and the guilty brought to justice. But back to the prints. While Warsaw officers meticulously checked more and more women, other investigators continued analyzing active missing persons reports. Days passed, and the fragments of the corpse that had been transported from Kraków still had no identified owner. Was the murdered woman even Polish? Did she have family or friends who might notice her absence and report it to the authorities? So much time had passed since her death. Why hadn't anyone filed a missing persons report? Or had someone done so, but the report was overlooked or never connected to the dismembered body? Despite the ongoing mystery of her identity, the prosecutor proceeded with initial interrogations. The first to be summoned were railway employees who had worked the train route from Kraków to Wrocław on August 29th. They recalled being approached by a man claiming to also be a railway worker. He asked them to deliver a laundry basket, offering to pay for the favor and even promised them a dinner. The basket was originally intended for Wrocław, but the man tried to persuade them to offload it earlier at the Lewin station. The request was a violation of standard procedure and the railwaymen rejected the offer. Still, they remembered the incident and the stranger who had made the unusual request. At the time, they suspected he might have been a provocateur or prankster and quickly forgot about it, until nearly 2 weeks later, when the horrifying contents of the laundry basket came to light. They managed to create a sketch of the man, and 2 months later, the militia arrested someone who matched the drawing. His name was Vladislav, a known drunk and petty thief in the area. At first, he denied any involvement in sending the package. He claimed it was impossible because he had been in Lewin Brzeski on the day in question and hadn't arrived in Kraków until September. Investigators challenged this, pointing out that the basket was too heavy for one person to move alone. Someone must have helped him. Still, Vladislav stuck to his story, though his alibi couldn't be verified. Then another local drunk, Henrik, stepped forward to support his friend's version of events.
He recalled that they had been standing in front of the train station when a cab pulled up and a woman got out. She asked them to help carry a basket and send it as luggage, offering 50 zlotys for the task. He described her as elderly, gray-haired, and short.
The description of the mysterious woman kept shifting. One moment Henry claimed she was a blonde, the next a brunette, and later still, an elderly lady with gray hair. With each hour of questioning, his testimony grew more and more inconsistent. Yet despite the unreliability of the witness, investigators had little else to go on. They had to cling to what was available. No evidence emerged linking the two station loiterers to the package or the murder, so they were released, though militiamen were instructed to keep an eye on them. Fast forward to May 23, 1956. More than 9 months had passed since the gruesome discovery on the train, and the investigation had made little progress. With leads exhausted and the trail cold, the case was shelved. One thing that could have breathed new life into it was establishing the identity of the woman. Militiamen continued combing through missing persons reports, hoping to match a name to the mutilated body. Whole cases were no longer being reviewed. Only the fingerprints of missing women were analyzed and compared with the fingerprint evidence left behind by the murdered woman. Yet even after months of effort, no breakthrough came. The surveillance of the men loitering near the train station proved fruitless as well. Just as the horrifying crime was beginning to fade from memory, an elderly woman appeared at the Kraków police station with a quiet but potentially crucial question. She asked whether the officers had any news about her neighbor, Mariana Galuskova. Supposedly, the woman had left for a sanatorium a year and a half earlier and had never returned. At first, the officers didn't make any connections, but the dates aligned suspiciously well. Galuskova had left Kraków on August 29, 1955, and a day later, parts of a woman's dismembered body were discovered. Even more shocking was the realization that a missing person report for Galuskova had been sitting in the police database for quite some time. It had simply been overlooked, and no one had linked her disappearance to the infamous corpse found on the train. At long last, there was a genuine lead, a chance to finally solve the mystery. One of the militiamen, filled with new energy and hope, rushed to notify the prosecutor who had overseen the original investigation. The name of the missing woman is checked. She had an ID card, so her fingerprints were already in the database. Investigators compare them with the prints taken at the forensic facility from the dismembered victim. Bingo. The body belongs to a Kraków resident, Mariana Galuskova. From this point on, the investigation takes a whole new direction. No more groping in the dark. Statistically, the perpetrator is usually someone close to the victim. A few interviews with neighbors, family, or friends might be all it takes to crack the case. Who knows? Maybe it'll be wrapped up by the end of the month. Back in the 1940s, Mariana Galuskova lived in Odrzykon, a small village in what is now the Podkarpacki province. Her children were killed during the war. Over time, her relationship with her husband deteriorated. Illness crept in. She grew increasingly isolated. Eventually, Mariana decided to start over. She moved to Kraków, hoping that life in the big city would offer new opportunities. She made a modest living selling goods door to door. At the old market, you'd find her peddling cigarettes, lemons, and chocolate. That's how she got by. At first, law enforcement gives her some trouble, but from 1948 onward, Gałuszkowa receives permission to run a small stall selling newspapers and cigarettes. It's a good period in her life. Her health is far from perfect, but the daily work and contact with people give her a sense of purpose. Thanks to this, she's able to earn a fairly decent living. It seems that her difficult decision to move to Kraków was the right one. At first, she lives in a nursing home, but the early mornings and late returns from work begin to bother the other residents. She moves in with a friend, but that arrangement doesn't last long either. She begins looking for new accommodation and eventually finds a room on Zwierzyniecka Street. It's there that she will spend her final days. At the end of 1948, Gałuszkowa meets a certain man, Stanisław Wójcik, who is significantly younger than her. Their relationship begins with brief conversations. He asks about her health and family. Over time, he helps her carry goods. A bond begins to form between the elderly vendor and the young man, a bond strengthened by the belief that he is a medical student. Gałuszkowa senses that her health is deteriorating. Perhaps these modern treatment methods, just being introduced in Poland and surely studied by Stanisław, will help her endure the pain and eventually regain her strength. Stanisław fits the image of a doctor, well-read, intelligent. Walking through the old market, he often wears a student cap and a white lab coat peeks out from beneath his coat. Even as a student, he works at the clinic. Despite his many responsibilities, he regularly helps the old woman run her stall. He took care of her, bringing medicine, checking her blood pressure. The woman was happy, grateful to have met someone like Wojciech in the autumn of her life, someone who seemed to care for her selflessly. Despite his young age, Stanisław Wójcik had a wife and child. When he revealed this to the elderly stallholder, she felt a pang of jealousy. On one hand, she saw him as a son. On the other, she began to dream of a life together. Wojciech reassured her that his marriage was failing and that a divorce was on the horizon. He began asking her for money, promising to save it for a cozy home they would one day share. The requests grew more frequent, and with them, so did his taste for luxury. After several years of study, his office door bore the title Stanisław Wójcik, Specialist in Women's Diseases. He saw patients both in Kraków and nearby Olesno. In 1954, everything changed for Gałuszkowa. Her trading license was revoked. She tried to sell illegally, but it brought more trouble than profit. She became destitute. Once financially stable, she had handed over her savings to Stanisław, certain he would help her in return. But when she asked him for the money back, he came up with excuse after excuse. As his own finances worsened, he lost interest in her. He stopped visiting as often. Their relationship frayed. Her trust in him eroded, and eventually, she turned to a lawyer. She wants to find out as much as she can about Wojciech and recover at least part of the money she had entrusted to him. A few days later, the attorney returns with shocking news. Stanisław Wójcik is not and never has been a doctor. In fact, he never even studied medicine. There's no doubt now that he is a fraud. Still, Gałuszkowa clings to the hope that there's been some mistake, that maybe he'll make things right. She doesn't want to ruin him, so she delays pressing charges. But her worsening financial situation forces her to act. She demands the return of 116,000 zlotys, the approximate amount she had given him over the years. Her lawyer reaches an agreement with Wojciech. A settlement is to be made, and the money returned by the end of August. But as you can probably guess, instead of paying her back, Wojciech chooses a darker solution. Because by now, the issue isn't just the money. Gałuszkowa and her lawyer know his secret. If it comes out that Wojciech is a fraud, his career is over. No one will come to see a fake doctor. Worse still, he could face court, public disgrace, and total ruin. That's when the idea of killing Mariana first takes shape. He makes an attempt as early as July. Despite everything, the two are still in contact. And though Wojciech was never a real doctor, he had picked up some medical knowledge over the years. He visits Mariana at home and gives her pills. After he leaves, she starts to feel weak. The ambulance takes her to the hospital. At the time, the poisoning attempt isn't detected, but Wojciech already knows his next move needs to be more calculated. This time, he decides the murder will take place in his own apartment. The date is set for August 29th. He begins crafting an alibi. On the day of the killing, he's meant to be engaged in medical duties, performing treatments to keep up appearances. He also pacifies the lawyer preparing to file a lawsuit against him, promising to return the money and settle the matter peacefully. Galuskova, meanwhile, is convinced that things are finally turning around. She even talks about finding a spot at a health retreat, something she's long dreamed of. Her doctor, as she still affectionately calls him, promises to arrange it. He tells her that on August 29th, he'll personally escort her to the sanatorium. Mariana is thrilled. She even begins to feel guilty for doubting him. Sure, maybe he isn't a real doctor, but maybe he really does care. At the start of this episode, I mentioned a storm. Now, it's time for the lightning to return. On August 29th, 1955, the day of the murder, a violent storm breaks over Kraków. It begins at 1:20 p.m. and rages for nearly 3 hours. That window of thunder and chaos gives Wojciech cover to carry out his brutal plan. He calls for a cab, though it's unclear whether it was a car or a horse-drawn carriage. The driver was never identified. We also don't know if Mariana went willingly or if she was coerced. But what we do know is that they traveled from Zwierzyniecka Street to Wojciech's residence on Długa Street. The man lives with his wife, child, and other families in a shared building. On that day, all the other tenants are out at work, except for one woman who's just stepped out to the store. Wojciech and Mariana are completely alone. He tells her that before heading to the sanatorium, she'll need a vitamin injection, just one quick shot. As the drug begins to take effect, and Mariana grows drowsy, he clears her throat with a metal tool. Blood fills a bowl. Calmly, Wojciech leaves the room carrying it, only to unexpectedly bump into the woman returning from the store. The hallway is dimly lit. She sees him holding a bowl with a dark liquid inside. But blood? That never even crosses her mind. Wojciech remains composed. He knows the routine. This woman is about to go on her usual afternoon walk with her baby. That will give him a few uninterrupted minutes. Enough time to finish what he started and find a way to dispose of the body. As she gets the child ready and leaves the apartment, there's another complication. A patient. One of Wojciech's patients, clearly unaware of what's happening, shows up at the apartment and buzzes the intercom insistently. Wojciech has no choice. He needs to handle this first. He gets in the car with the patient and heads to the clinic. On the way, he crosses paths with the same tenant again. Cautious now, he tells her he forgot his keys and asks to borrow hers. This way, she'll have to knock to re-enter. That knock will buy him just enough time, just enough warning, so she won't stumble into a hallway holding a secret she was never meant to discover.
Upon his return, the fake doctor from Krakow begins dismembering the corpse. Outside, a storm rages over the city. Torrential rain and rolling thunder mask every sound. No one hears the axe or the cleaver slicing through flesh and bone. Later, when neighbors are questioned, they all confirm the same thing. Not a single suspicious noise broke the silence that day. With calculated precision, Wojciech wraps the torso in a bedspread, then covers the severed limbs with pieces of flannel and his own child's underwear. Finally, he carefully packs the remains into a wicker basket.
At 7 o'clock that evening, part of the dismembered corpse is already stashed away in the baggage room at Krakow's main train station, registered as shipment number 85703, bound for Wrocław. The legs, meanwhile, are sent off separately on a train headed for Gdynia later that same day. Wojciech believes he's taken care of the problem. Now all that remains is to fabricate a story convincing enough to keep suspicion at bay. He writes a letter to Galuszkowa's brother, who lives in Argentina, claiming that Mariana has been hospitalized and that her treatment is expected to take as long as 5 months. He even requests that the brother send medicine to a specified address. The man obliges and sends a package. Wojciech also informs Mariana's neighbor about the supposed hospital stay and, conveniently, begins collecting her incoming mail himself. As time passes, he weaves a new narrative. He tells the neighbor that Mariana met someone new while in the hospital, a caregiver with whom she's allegedly begun a relationship, and that she's broken off all contact with him. Still, he insists he's concerned about her well-being and gently probes to see if the neighbor has had any recent contact with her. Eventually, he adds that Mariana was transferred to another medical facility and later left to visit relatives. After that, she vanished completely. Meanwhile, her brother in Argentina grows increasingly worried due to the lack of any direct response. He reaches out to another sibling living in Odrzycon and asks him to personally investigate. The man travels to Kraków and meets with Wojciech, but the meeting reveals nothing of substance. Wojciech stays calm, sticking to his story. The trail for now remains cold.
Neighbors become suspicious. Galushkova disappeared suddenly, completely broke off contact. Something could have happened. As early as December 1955, Galushkova's brother reported her missing to the police. Unfortunately, at the time, this fact was not connected to the corpse found several months earlier. Despite the fact that officers kept checking information on missing women, someone must have overlooked the report of Galushkova's disappearance, so the case waited for another long months for an explanation.
Although there was no contact with Mariana Galushkova, her lawyer did not stop his activities, and in September 1955, filed a lawsuit against Wojciech for repayment of 116,000 zlotys. The first court date was set for November 15th. The proceedings were suspended because there was no contact with Mariana. The militia did not identify the corpse until 1957. At that time, residents of the apartment building on Zwierzyniecka Street, where Mariana lived, were interviewed. One name kept coming up: Wojciech, a young doctor who had taken care of the woman before she disappeared and had even arranged for her to go to a sanatorium from which Galushkova never returned. Many facts began to come together. The militiamen also discovered a lawsuit filed against him. It was about big money, a sufficient motive to kill someone. In addition, the militia documents came across a letter that Wojciech had sent to the brother of the missing woman to Argentina. This document ended up in the hands of officers when she was reported missing. Wojciech becomes the prime suspect and is arrested in December 1957. He went unpunished for more than 30 months. He revealed early on that he was not really a doctor and had never studied at the medical academy. His title was a complete mystification that everyone believed. In time, probably even the person concerned himself began to believe that he was a doctor. We will quote you an excerpt from an article from the Echo of Kraków. The daily published on March 11, 1958, contained an article with the headline, "Sender of Macabre Shipment Found." The journalists recalled the whole affair. They described the painstaking investigation, and one paragraph dealt with the arrest of the suspect.
The Dr. Stanislaw Wojciech was arrested. And here is another revelation. He never finished his medical studies. He had only a high school education. Nevertheless, he sometimes practiced medicine, illegally and dangerously, particularly in the area of Olesno, where his parents lived in the Dąbrowa Tarnowska district, posing as a specialist in women's diseases. He had his own stamp, wide acquaintances among doctors, and moved freely in well-known social circles in Kraków, often participating in and discussing strictly specialized topics. In 1953, he even married into a respectable family.
As you can hear for yourself, Wojciech had to put in a lot of work to be recognized as a doctor. But how did that even happen? In 1947, he graduated from high school in the small town of Mielec, dreaming of studying at the medical academy in Kraków. Although he attempted to gain admission, he failed the entrance exam and was deeply ashamed. He refused to return to his hometown as a failure. Everyone, family, friends, and neighbors alike, already believed that young Wojciech was destined to become a doctor. So the word was out. Determined to hide his failure, he chose not to tell anyone and stayed in Kraków. He acquired a student cap and a white smock, attended classes alongside actual students, and despite not being officially enrolled at the academy, he actively participated in lectures and practical exercises. Proudly, he told everyone he met that he was a medical student, and over time, he made numerous acquaintances. His peers at the academy, who later became fully qualified doctors, never suspected that their friend was only pretending to be a student. They treated him as one of their own, taking notes together and preparing for exams. After a few years, by the time Wojciech had firmly integrated into the medical community, he was easily gaining access to the clinics of various medical institutions. They began calling him a doctor, and he never denied it. Strangers sought his advice and asked him to recommend medications for various ailments. That's how he began practicing medicine. He put up a sign on his door and started receiving patients. After all, no one ever asked to see his diploma. In 1951, however, he was penalized by the Criminal Administrative College for illegally using the title of doctor and was also sentenced by the district court in Dąbrowa Tarnowska for unlawfully practicing medicine. But that information never reached Kraków, allowing Wojciech to continue his fraudulent medical practice undisturbed. When questioned, the suspect openly admitted to the deception, but denied any involvement in the murder. At first, he remained calm, but when he learned the specifics of the accusations, he reacted with outrage. According to him, Galuskova had left Kraków in 1955, most likely to seek medical treatment, and he claimed to know nothing more. He also asserted that at the time of the crime, he hadn't even been in Kraków, but had been staying at a summer resort in Bystra Podhalańska with his wife and child. The prosecution needed strong evidence. During the investigation, Wojciech remained arrogant and self-assured. He mocked the justice system, convinced that he had erased all traces and that proving the murder would be impossible. But with each passing day of the painstaking inquiry, the truth crept closer. Everyone who knew the murdered woman confirmed her close relationship with the fake doctor. For 7 years during his supposed studies, the young man had regularly visited her stall, helping her and asking for loans. In return, he would provide medicine or write prescriptions. Mariana's neighbors were also aware of the debt, and that a lawsuit had been filed over it. Jealousy and money are among the most common motives for murder, and one of them clearly fit the killing of the ailing newspaper vendor. One witness revealed that on August 29th, Galuskova had planned a trip to a sanatorium, one supposedly arranged by none other than the fake doctor himself. Signs of Stanislaw Wojciech's guilt continued to pile up. Even the suspect himself added fuel to the fire when he described in detail what he had done on that day.
That day I went to the market in the morning to buy vegetables. My wife had asked me to, and she was away on vacation in Bystra Podhalańska with our child and her mother. After that, I ran some errands for patients I had appointments with. It was about securing them spots in the hospital. That's how I spent the whole morning. In the afternoon, I met up with my father and his friend, who had just arrived in Kraków that day. I stayed with them until the evening. I didn't see Galuskova at any point. I can't be held responsible for the fairy tales people come up with.
Wojciech seems to have forgotten that the legs found under the seat on the train in Gdynia were wrapped in the Podhal edition of a Kraków newspaper. And in his explanation, he mentioned the village of Bystra Podhalańska. That specific issue of the newspaper could be purchased there. His story didn't hold water. The prosecutor recorded Wojciech's version of events and sent him back to the detention center. His alibi was then checked, and it completely collapsed. His father's visit took place on August 30th, not August 29th. The patients he claimed to have assisted that day testified that there had been no arrangements. Wojciech was visibly nervous and simply sent them away with a prescription. And what was behind that nervousness? You can probably guess. One of the patients, who finally managed to speak with Wojciech after multiple attempts, said the doctor tried to get rid of him. But the man insisted, and together they went to the Social Security office and the pediatric clinic. This happened just before a storm broke over the city. According to the prosecutor, it was after this encounter, when Wojciech was finally alone in his apartment, that he dismembered the body. Items found near the corpse would also become crucial pieces of evidence pointing to his guilt. In a wicker basket, the victim's body was wrapped in a bedspread which, as it later turned out, belonged to the suspect's mother-in-law. The neck was wrapped in a pair of children's underwear, also taken from his home. One key piece of evidence from the Gdynia discovery was the August 28th issue of the Podhale edition of Gazeta Krakowska, which had been used to wrap parts of the corpse. Investigators later confirmed that Wojciech had been in Podhale on that exact day, visiting his wife and child. His trial was covered extensively in the local press. Wojciech had a clear motive, significant debt, and the fear that Galuskova would expose his secret, that he wasn't really a doctor. By this point, the evidence was strong enough to justify filing charges. The trial began in the second half of October 1958, with each session covered by the local newspapers. Less than a month later, a verdict was reached. Here is an excerpt from the Echo of Krakow article published on November 13th.
Galuskova's murderer, Stanisław Wójcik, was sentenced to life imprisonment. A provincial court composed of 3 professional judges, after thoroughly reviewing the case, delivered its verdict yesterday. The court found Stanisław Wójcik guilty under Article 225, Paragraph 1 of the Criminal Code, and sentenced him to life imprisonment, along with the permanent loss of public and civil honorary rights. The court's reasoning was extensive and well articulated. Dr. Janina Poloni, vice president of the provincial court, delivered a meticulous analysis of all the evidence, covering both direct and circumstantial elements that were crucial to the case. It was emphasized that the witness testimony, together with the physical evidence, formed a coherent and logical whole. The court also considered the passage of time and the possibility of external influence on the witnesses, but ultimately concluded that the authenticity of their statements could not be questioned. Any distortions, self-suggestions, or outside suggestions were found to be consistent across witnesses for both the prosecution and the defense, thereby meeting the same criteria for credibility. The motive for the crime was identified as the defendant's substantial debt, around 100,000 zlotys, consisting of cigarettes taken on credit from Galuskova, various loans, and financial support she had provided throughout the years of his supposed medical studies.
In its reasoning, the court acknowledged that many questions arising from the trial remained, and would likely continue to remain, unanswered. Chief among these was the exact manner in which the killing had been carried out. Experts believed poisoning was the most likely cause of death, but they could not be certain. Additionally, the victim's head was never found. Investigators assumed that Wojciech had disposed of it in the Vistula River, but this remained speculative. There were also unresolved questions surrounding how Galuskova was lured to the apartment where the murder took place. Equally puzzling was the involvement of the 2 drunks from the train station mentioned earlier. Were they accomplices in the murder or simply individuals paid to help transport a package? Did they knowingly aid in disposing of the body, or were they unaware of what they were handling? These and other mysteries remained unsolved. However, despite these uncertainties, the court had no doubt that Stanisław Wójcik was guilty of murdering the elderly woman. According to the Echo of Krakow journalist covering the case, Wójcik received the verdict calmly. But shortly after the sentence was handed down, the defense announced plans to appeal to the Supreme Court, and they followed through. The appeal raised concerns about shortcomings in the investigation. One issue highlighted was that the body parts found on the train in Gdynia had been sent back to Krakow for forensic examination, and this shipment included a copy of the Pomeranian Gazette. The defense used this detail to argue that the crime might have involved other parties. They suggested that sailors could have been responsible, claiming that Galuskova was last seen before her death with 2 suspicious men from northern Poland who had allegedly come to Krakow on business. The men were said to have brought her fruit and other rare, desirable goods. One of the witnesses, after carefully examining the flannel belt, confirmed without hesitation,
"Yes, I recognize it. This is definitely one of the belts that was in the apartment we shared. It belonged to Stanisław Wójcik."
This testimony was a turning point. It directly linked the disputed belt, previously omitted from the official documentation, to the suspect. With that, prosecutor Henryk Praki succeeded in verifying one of the most contested pieces of evidence in the case. The confusion surrounding Gazeta Pomorska was also resolved. The newspaper had indeed ended up among the body parts returned to Kraków, but not because it had any connection to the murder. It had simply been included by mistake, most likely brought in by one of the officers or medics during transport. It was an unfortunate coincidence that the defense tried to exploit, but ultimately, it had no impact on the case. As for the mysterious woman who had allegedly handed off the package in Kraków, there was never any independent confirmation of her existence. The only references to her came from unreliable witnesses whose accounts changed with every retelling. No railway worker, postal employee, or bystander could corroborate the story. The theory that a woman had orchestrated the crime or played a major role in disposing of the body collapsed under scrutiny. With the clarification of the belt, the newspaper, and the implausible accomplice theory, Prosecutor Procky was able to deliver a comprehensive response to the Supreme Court. The review upheld the original verdict. Despite procedural errors and investigative oversights, there remained no doubt about Wojciech's guilt. The circumstantial and direct evidence formed a consistent and logical whole. Wojciech remained behind bars, serving the life sentence he had received for one of the most gruesome and shocking crimes in post-war Kraków. To secure the corpse, Wojciech used whatever he could find around him: his own child's underwear, his mother-in-law's cape, and, as it later turned out, a flannel belt that belonged to his roommate. Investigators attempted to locate the blouse the belt came from, but the task proved challenging. The garment wasn't in the apartment on Długa Street. The roommate suggested it might be at her mother's home in Nowa Huta, but it wasn't there either. The prosecutor followed another lead. The blouse may have been given to Agnieszka's friend in Piechoti. That location was also checked. Agnieszka, surprised, confirmed that she had indeed received the blouse, but admitted to tearing it up some time ago to reuse the fabric for another project. Still, she handed over the remaining scraps for examination. That was enough. A textile analysis was conducted to determine whether the belt and the blouse fragments were made from the same material. Even back then, fabric forensics offered significant possibilities. Investigators examined the weave, machine flaws, fabric quality, and other unique characteristics. After a wait, the results came in. Experts confirmed that the flannel belt had been cut from the same satin material as the blouse.
Other inconsistencies were also examined. If items from the apartment on Długa Street were found with the corpse, it suggested that the murder and dismemberment took place there. Based on this assumption, investigators expected to find traces of blood in the apartment. Additionally, it was possible that one of the residents could identify the murder weapon. The prosecutor requested an inventory of all household items that could have been used to commit the crime. One woman was convinced that there had once been 2 wooden stools in the apartment, but one had gone missing in 1955. Was it on this missing stool that Wojciech dismembered the body?
To dig deeper, the prosecutor traveled to Gdansk to consult with a forensic medical facility. His goal was to verify whether the severed limbs had been wrapped solely in Gazeta Krakowska, as the evidence initially indicated, or if, as Wojciech's defense claimed, Gazeta Pomorska had also been used. The forensic doctor who handled the case was adamant. Gazeta Krakowska was the only paper involved.
My memory may fail me, but we always had a habit of documenting the condition and wrappings of the corpses sent to us. Legs wrapped in gray parchment paper and Gazeta Krakowska. You can be absolutely certain that Gazeta Pomorska was not part of the shipment we received from the militia.
So why did Gazeta Pomorska later appear with the corpse that was returned to Kraków? The most plausible explanation is that it was used to rewrap the limbs by someone at the Department of Forensic Medicine or by a militia officer during transport or storage. In the end, this specific detail couldn't be definitively verified. But what truly mattered was that on August 30th, when the cleaner discovered the package in the train compartment, it had been wrapped solely in Gazeta Krakowska. That fact allowed the prosecutor to resolve a major point of contention in the case. Around the same time, another key development occurred. A new and significant witness came forward. A former cellmate of Wojciech, from the very prison where he had been held, contacted the prosecutor with some revealing information.
I know 2 things about this doctor's case. The axe the militiaman found in his apartment actually belonged to a neighbor, which explains why there were no traces of blood on it. The real axe, the one he used to chop up Galushkova, he threw away. And now he's laughing behind their backs, especially at the officers who interrogated Vladislav, the man who helped send the basket with the torso to Wrocław. The doctor paid Vladek a few thousand zlotys to get rid of Galushkova and to drop off her severed leg somewhere else. Wladek placed those legs in the train compartment while the train was still sitting on the siding. "Mr. Prosecutor, I know I'm in here for murder too," the cellmate reportedly said, "but at least I respected the corpse."
As you can see, no one can be fully trusted, least of all a fellow inmate. Still, the man promised to repeat everything in court. He claimed he was genuinely disgusted by what Wojciech had done, which is why he decided to speak up, though perhaps he also struck a deal with the prosecutor, hoping for an early release. On November 7th, 1960, a new trial began. This time, Wojciech wasn't alone on the defendant's bench. Władysław and Henryk, the two men who helped dispose of the body and carry the packages to the train station, were tried alongside him. Defense attorneys worked hard, calling witnesses to provide alibis for the accused, but the prosecutor held firm, highlighting inconsistencies in their testimonies. The dates didn't match. The details were off. Everything, every scrap of evidence and every contradiction pointed squarely at the false doctor. Eventually, a verdict was reached. The second trial, like the first, was widely covered by local newspapers, with the press documenting every twist in the chilling case.
Echo of Krakow, December 19th, 1960. Verdict in the Wojciech trial. Today at 12 o'clock, the provincial court in Kraków delivered a verdict in the trial of Stanislaw Wojciech and his co-defendants, which had been ongoing for a month and a half. Stanislaw Wojciech stood accused of the murder of Mariana Galuskova in August 1955. His co-defendants, Władysław and Henryk, were charged with aiding in the concealment and disposal of the body. The court, composed of professional judges, found Stanislaw Wojciech guilty and sentenced him to life imprisonment. Władysław received a 4-year prison sentence, while Henryk was acquitted of all charges. At the time of printing, the presiding judge was still delivering the rationale behind the verdict.
The Echo of Krakow published an article the following day that discussed the verdict referenced by the journalist. It reads as follows.
Only one person had a clear motive for the murder: Stanislaw Wojciech. First, he owed Mariana Galuskova more than 90,000 zlotys, a debt he had acknowledged in writing. Second, she held a dangerous secret. She knew that Wojciech was not a real doctor, a deception he had managed to conceal even from his own family for over a decade. The court concluded that Galuskova may have arrived at Długa Street voluntarily, either on her own or accompanied by someone. Her presence would not have raised suspicion, especially given Wojciech's distant relationship with his neighbors and the timing of the murder. During the dismemberment of the body, estimated to have taken place between 1 and 3 p.m., no one was present in the apartment. Neighbors were either asleep or already at work. Wojciech, anticipating a potential interruption, had cleverly borrowed his roommate's keys, ensuring she would knock before entering. The victim was likely killed earlier, between 7 and 10 a.m. Although poisoning was considered the most probable cause of death, the possibility that a cattle slaughtering tool was used could not be ruled out, an uncertainty made harder to resolve due to the absence of the victim's head. The chilling case, which began with the disappearance of a seemingly ordinary woman and spiraled into one of Krakow's most gruesome post-war crimes, finally reached its legal conclusion. Though many questions and the echoes of deception and brutality still lingered in the public's mind.
That final twist adds a haunting epilogue to an already chilling case. After orchestrating one of the most macabre crimes in post-war Poland, deceiving neighbors, colleagues, and even the legal system for years, Stanislaw Wojciech quietly faded into obscurity, far from the drama of Kraków. In the end, the system granted him a second chance, reducing his sentence and releasing him back into society. But the most enduring mystery remains: the missing head of Mariana Galuskova. The grim possibility that it still rests somewhere at the bottom of the Vistula, unidentified, forgotten, lingers like a shadow. Water tends to keep its secrets well, and even now, decades later, fragments of the truth may still lie hidden, cloaked in silt and silence. Wojciech's death in 1980 in Stalowa Wola, following a quiet and reportedly well-behaved stint in prison, stands in stark contrast to the horror he left behind. The man who once mingled among Krakow's elite, posing as a doctor, did not die in disgrace, but in near anonymity, a life of deception bookended by lies and a quiet grave. It's the kind of story that lingers, not just for its brutality, but for how easily it might have vanished. Another truth almost lost to time. Dark File. Deadly good stories.